Hi, I'm Tracy Soltis, your leading health and nutrition coach and molecular biologist. I've consulted with hundreds of people around the world on their human journey. So if you're a seeker looking for answers, information and knowledge, you'll find it here. Come on a journey with me as I explore the science, the physical body, and the cognitive and energetic space of what it really means to be human. All right, everyone, welcome back to another exciting episode today on the Mind Body Studio podcast. And I've got a real treat for you guys because I've got Dr. Patrick Jones here with me today. Now, the work of Dr. Patrick Jones focuses on leading people to awaken their true nature of inner well-being. With a previous background in clinical psychology for 20 years, he is now, through teaching and research, bringing the marriage of psychology and spirituality into the mainstream. Patrick has presented at state, national and international conferences in psychology and health and has been a director at Eastern ashrams and Western monasteries. He has experience in the commercial sector, having founded several companies and a not-for-profit charity, and has managed a portfolio of over a dozen properties. Welcome, Patrick.
Hey there.
How are you doing today?
Yeah, good.
It's so great to have you on. And I know that we met a couple of months ago and we've had to wait a little bit to have this chat. So I'm glad the day's finally here. And so I'd love to kind of get our listeners to know a little bit more about who you are and what you do. So perhaps you can give us a little intro about yourself.
Right. Okay. So, since we are talking about both inner well-being and external quality of life, I guess the question is, what's my reference point?
Yeah.
Okay. So, it's a great question on a few fronts. But essentially, I do things out in the world. I have a background in psychology, so I try and make use of that. But I think what I've done over time, I guess, is just try to hijack some of the insights of psychology and turn them towards the inner well-being space. And so I've ended up doing research in that, and my love, if you like, is to bring. You could almost say that the very natural understanding of our true nature into something that is comprehensible and sensible for people, so they don't have to think that I just need to head off to India and or to a Western monastery and discover the beyond. But it's actually my nature, and what does that look like? And just trying to almost not quite dumb that down, but deconstruct that in a way that's sensible and almost obvious. So really, that's kind of what I am in a sense of what I'm about. Yeah. And I guess my life, my work is dedicated to that, and my own personal experience is about kind of just absorbing and entering into that and cultivating and deepening that experience, and then expression back out in the world.
Wow. And I think there is a bit of a misconception that you have to go to these beautiful kind of monasteries and places overseas to actually get that inner fulfillment, but that's not necessarily true, right?
Yeah, they are extraordinary and delightful, and as we were talking about earlier, just getting away does something to us, is that time out.
Yes.
Breaks our patterns, the conditioned stimulus that often we're in front of in terms of our environments trigger quite often conditioned response, and so having the time out gives us a chance to almost have a gap from all of that, and get some space. And yet I think the work that we're also looking at here is how to create that space, that gap within where I am, because it's, as I said, it's a natural thing.
Yeah, and look, I've got a list of questions here because we're super prepared for this, right? And so I think one of the first things that I want to ask you is maybe that you could explain the difference between quality of life and general well-being, because there is a difference between the two, but I think there's a misunderstanding of what both mean. So perhaps you have a bit of a definition for us.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so start off in the basic psychology literature. Well-being, the most common term is what they call subjective well-being, and it's connected to, in a sense, the presence of positive affect or positive feelings, the absence of negative affect or negative feelings, and what they call a cognitive appraisal of our life, that we are happy with how our life is going, or life satisfaction. So in a way, it's thoughts and feelings.
Yeah,
you could say, but they're also in interaction with the actual life conditions. So it's not just my own mental space, it's my own mental space in relationship to my life and how it's going. What I have found, which was a little bit shocking in the initial research, was that, they said often the top 5 quality of life areas, relationships, work, money, health, leisure, like these are fairly significant ones. And the general idea was that if we get those right, we're going to feel good.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of goal setting and so on is about positioning ourselves so that we optimize those, a bit like almost profit and loss, optimize the profit in our life and minimize the loss, that whole equation. What I found, kind of devastatingly really, was that these 5 areas, plus, obviously others, made up such a small percentage of actually what well-being was.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that doesn't make sense because that's where we're putting all our attention to try and improve those. And over time, the research found that it was actually the mother lode of where that came from, the predictor of well-being, was my mental state about those things.
Yeah.
So it's not like they're not important, but if we were to almost split it, it was like they were 20% important and the 80% was found in how I view those life conditions.
Yeah.
So in a way that completely sort of flummoxed me while I was originally doing research because I was really keen to get this right in my own life and figure out the research behind it.
But that's really interesting though, because as you're saying that, I'm thinking to myself, because we don't all put the same sort of significance on different areas of our life.
Right,
so
true.
that kind of makes sense that, if our the way that we, cognitively look at a particular area is completely different to how someone else is going to view it. So in a well-being perspective, we're almost going through the motions with certain things because we think we have to do them, but it's not really bringing us joy. So our mental health is not awesome in that particular area.
Yep. And the other, you've actually kind of segued into the predictors of self-esteem, that the number one that they found was social comparison. And what that means basically is that some areas, as you said, are more important to us than others. So, for example, if we're like a sports jock, that's if we even have a significant injury or we're really poor in that.
Yeah.
Our self-esteem theoretically, using that model, which I don't agree with, but it's the typical starting model we all have.
Yeah.
Our self-esteem will be low or poor, whilst perhaps an academic kid is like, do not care, right?
Yes.
But if they fail a test, I'm sorry for these stereotypes, but the sports jock might go, whatever.
Yeah.
But the academic will be like super disturbed.
Yeah.
So it's about loading as well, as you kind of highlighted, where we put our priorities. But then the danger with that is that it now means that our well-being is hinged upon the success of the things that load heavily for us or are our priorities. And there's the rub. And we want to be able to somehow get some freedom from those life conditions, not ignoring them, being like strategic and making them work, but not have our well-being continually rising and falling like the share market based upon how they're going.
And do you think there's unrealistic expectations that people should be amazing at all of those areas? Because I know that's what I see here a lot.
Okay.
Is that everyone looks at their whole life and they look at all the different categories and they look at their general well-being in all of these categories and they go, why am I not performing as well in this particular area as that particular area? So they're not necessarily comparing themselves to other people. They're questioning their own inner capabilities of why am I not performing the way that I think I should be performing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, at one level, I guess you're going to have different groups that'll have different pressures. So perhaps I can't relate to that as much because I've extracted myself from those kinds of pressure groups. But I could easily see that when you're in them, then you're really going to feel it.
Yes.
And I expect you've kind of worked in environments where you've had that,
Yeah, definitely. And I do it to myself because I am academic. And so I have plenty of times put pressure on myself to achieve certain things and the fear of failure, and that's been my own inner work is overcoming those areas and going, you know what, like myself and what I actually provide to the world is enough. It doesn't need to be any more than what it is, but it's the acceptance around that as well, and not feeling the sense of failure for not reaching as high as what I think I should be reaching when I'm already doing amazing anyway, right?
Yeah.
And majority of people they're doing so well and so amazing, but they're so hard on themselves.
Yeah, and yet what's always interesting is a lot of topics, they say like in philosophy, never argue, always distinguish. It's never just right or wrong. So like even in this topic, for people can get to that level of self-acceptance where now they're okay no matter how well it's going. But then the trap for young players in that one is that they just become lazy, like, whatever, it's all good, and it's not, because you're not reaching your potential.
Yes.
So then we have to kind of go, well, let's not go so far that, yes, you have managed to separate your well-being from it, good job, but, what's your natural expression as a human being? If you do have that potential, what is that? What's your flow? What does that look like? And let's still be on that, but not be so, have a well-being so precariously dependent upon it, which means that we can still perform in the world and contribute amazingly.
Yeah.
So I'm really strong on what some people might call the awakening in the marketplace, if you like. Just fully opening to your nature, but contributing, really effectively in the world still.
Yeah. And so let's chat a little bit about mindfulness and how this kind of plays a role in all of these types of areas that you've been looking at as well.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess my doctoral area was in the predictors of quality of life and well-being and the effectiveness of something like mindfulness to be able to make a difference.
Yeah.
And clearly now there's so much research out. But, mindfulness, one of my critiques also of mindfulness, that it has been a bit decontextualized from its origins, which were, ultimately to serve, again, the enlightenment traditions.
Yeah.
But it's been used really successfully for, clinical advantage now in terms of anxiety, depression, fibromyalgia, like a whole range of areas, which is extraordinary. So at one level, it has been about, the ability to step back and cultivate a neutral, non-judgmental stance towards my thoughts and feelings, so that, really nice phrase sometimes they use is, instead of, oh God, how come I'm just no good at this stuff? And the mindfulness approach would be to step back and use these little 3 words beforehand, or these words. Not 3. I'm having the thought that ... I'm so useless at this stuff. As soon as you do that step back, I'm having the thought that. It's like, you know what? I generated that thought that I'm now feeling bad about.
Yes.
It's like, now we have a little bit more choice. And then we go back into do I want to choose a different way of thinking or a different approach? So that then brings us to the quality of life research that, our mental relationship to those life conditions does make a difference, because if we can adjust the thought process, then how we relate to those life conditions is different. So I guess that's what I would always call an introductory level of mindfulness. I'm super keen on the intermediate and advanced, but we'll get to that.
Yes, we definitely will get to that, because what you did mention is kind of could we say the beginner area?
Or introductory,
Yeah. I'm just going to get you to turn your mic just slightly. Yep, so towards you. Yep, that way. Other way. Yeah.
The other left, as they say.
That sounds much better. Now I can hear you much, much clearer. Okay, awesome. Thanks, everybody, for your patience on that one. All right, so I'm going to go back to my question. So you mentioned before that I guess you feel as though we could live in a world, or it would be amazing to imagine a world where everybody was, I guess, psychologically healthy and spiritually awakened. Can you perhaps give us a little bit more explanation on what you mean by that?
Yeah, sure. Sometimes I have a phrase, it's almost a bit like there's a continuum between unhealthy ego moving to healthy ego, which is generally the domain of what I would call conventional psychology. And then the domain of often religion and spirituality is the next step, is to go from healthy ego to no ego.
Yeah.
And I think in a way that we should really just make that the work from, to uncover, the unhealthy patterns that we have, and to basically go from unreasonable to reasonable, so we look at our life and others in a more reasonable, balanced way.
Do you think people can go from healthy or unhealthy to no ego?
Definitely. And there is like there is a process from unhealthy to healthy, there is also a process of deconstructing the sense of self that takes us from the healthy ego to no ego. And essentially, to me, it's really quite simple. It's just, and neuroscience is fantastic these days because they jump on anything now and say, well, can we validate this and can we see this? And one of the great things is this sense of self. It's like, okay, well, you guys are saying there's no self. Like, can we verify that? And what they've found is that the brain can do. Obviously more work needs to be done, but brain can do this type of almost selfing, which is, it collects data from all different places, puts it together, and we have a cohesive sense of self that is an ongoing live feed from all the data that's referencing who we are in relation to our environment.
Yeah.
But that can get interrupted, and not just with religious or spiritual things, but even like a grand mal seizure, where the processing literally gets interrupted, and the sense of self temporarily that's being constructed is interrupted.
Yeah.
And so it's like temporarily we're existing without this sense of self. But meditation traditions know that we can do this. We've been doing this for forever.
Yeah.
And so it's more the healthy self to that, or to know self, or healthy ego to know ego, is more just seeing through this artifice or this construction of a sense of me that has been created, that we can have a break from. I like to talk about it like, who are you in the gap between thoughts?
Yeah.
Or where are you? And I think that's an amazing journey, because sometimes people's thoughts are horrific and they're just relentlessly negative. It's like to be able to teach someone to be able to have a gap from all of that and still experience themselves independent of thought.
Yeah.
There's a release of amazing proportions.
I have a lot of clients come in and work quite significantly on negative thoughts, because that seems to be something, I don't know if you could say the word plague, but it feels as though it does plague people quite significantly in everyday life. People are constantly dealing with their own, self-thoughts and self-doubt and things like that. And I know that there's definitely going to be people listening to this chat that we're having today who are struggling with this negative self-talk and these limiting beliefs that they go through and the patterns and the cycles that they keep reliving over and over again.
Yep.
Is there some advice that you would give to them to kind of start working, on clearing some of these patterns or cycles that they're reliving over and over again?
Yeah. And we talked about sort of beginner or introductory all the way up to the later stages.
Yeah.
Initially, it's just trying that stepping back process when you have a thought, and just see if you can literally just say, I'm having the thought that, whatever, and then repeat whatever that thing was, and see if you can get some level of objectivity. And that's what mindfulness is, the ability to have that neutral, non-judgmental stance towards the present moment that I'm experiencing.
Yeah.
Second is, I guess, is to see that a lot of what's in our head is inherited. It's sort of our psychological lineage from either our modelling. Social learning theory talks about modelling as being a significant part of how we learn and imprint.
Yeah.
We look at animals. It's not a curriculum. It's an imprinting modelling system of learning.
Yeah.
So we need to look at that, and that a lot of what is in our brain about ourselves, wasn't our fault in the first place. We didn't actually create that stuff. We modelled it, and then we got quite good at doing it ourselves. So then there's that mixture where it's both.
Do you mean like from our parents?
Parental, it can be, and it doesn't mean parents are being, malicious. They're just being human and mixed with the mixture of conditionality and unconditionality, or perhaps even wanting to drive us towards some success. And like, you look much better when da-da-da, and it's like, okay, great. So now I reference myself against that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I found that like with intelligence when I was a kid, like my mother really valued that, and my brother was in Cambridge and blah blah, and so like to me somewhere that became important. But then the flip side of it is that if you're not performing in that, then you're in trouble, you could say. So being able to see where we get our variations, and then have some choice around that, is the first step. Yeah.
And I think, would you say that it's also not about getting overwhelmed with all of the things that you might need to work on as well? Because a lot of people are in kind of crisis, like a crisis kind of trauma response when they're having these negative thoughts, and sometimes they're having, the physical symptoms and things that come along with them as well. And it can be quite, it can take people back when they're struggling with these sorts of episodes over and over again. And so given that we've talked about, I guess, the beginner level to what that looks like, what would be the next step? Because I want to get a little bit deeper in there. Let's like get in there just a little bit more.
Yeah, good. I was wondering where we're moving this.
Yeah, because look, some people have been doing this sort of work for a long time and they need the next steps, like.
That's quite true.
Yeah. So like, what is that? What does it look like?
Yeah, and it's a big kind of dear to my heart, this paradigm shift in psychology and the general conversation about mental health, actually. I guess my critique of the well-being paradigm in psychology was that it was still a feeling and thought-based model.
Yeah.
And I had experienced myself, in a sense, independent of that, just watching all of that. So, where do I go for my well-being when I've experienced a sense of a space, you could say, that wasn't that. It's like, well, that well-being model is a bit flimsy. It's not enough. And so I think the next, level for people is to, I still think it's important to have a balanced, what I would call, if you want to say, quality of life.
Yeah.
Because it's almost the stable foundation. And I think in my early work, it was like, awakening or bust, and I'd just go hell for leather, just trying to open myself up or people up and whatever else. And I think at one level, perhaps if you haven't got much time, you just want to just break through all the false senses of self that you can. But I think there's also some sense in having a life that works as best you can, because when you get to the intermediate or advanced stuff, that's all going to shake around big time. And not necessarily the conditions, but all the senses of selves connected to being any of that have to go ultimately, because they're all constructed. So whether I'm a good partner, what is relationship, when you're in a deep space where there's nothing there, and then you come out and there's nothing recognizable.
Yeah.
It's a little bit disconcerting, but it's not that. It's just that your mental impressions about all those things have had a good shake-up. Yeah. And then you almost have to reformulate life increasingly from a more open place that doesn't have all those inherited beliefs. But they're not just negative beliefs, they're also inherited positive beliefs about everything.
Yes, yeah. So that's where you kind of get stuck in a bit more ego-driven, would you think? Yeah. Which is, it's really hard, isn't it, with ego, because ego could also just be you being positive about something, or being enthusiastic, or being happy or joyful or something, and it can come across the wrong way, would you think, sometimes? And it can get you a bit confused as what's ego and what's actually just, I guess, that positive vibration that's happening. Yeah. And because I feel as though there does come a point for people when they realise that the beginner stage just doesn't work as well as what they were hoping it's going to, and that they actually need to dig a little bit deeper and work out what's actually going on at the core of certain issues as well, rather than just going, okay, well, this keeps coming up for me, so I'm going to sit with myself for 5 minutes and do some breath work, and they're breathing in, nothing's really happening, I can't calm myself down, like, why is this not working, or why am I still getting these thoughts in my head? And so they go through this process of trying all of these surface things, and then they go, you know what, I actually need to start feeling some of the things that are happening to me as well, and what effect that has on the physical body. Yep. Is there something there that you would like to chat about? Because I know that for me, I talk a lot about, the cognition and mindset, the energetic space and the physical body, and how they all are intertwined into this sense of self. And that when one is disrupted, the others become imbalanced. Yeah. And so obviously when it comes to mindset and cognition, we're automatically going to bring our frequency down if we're having negative thoughts. People aren't going to want to be around us, and we can feel that vibe. We might not be able to see it, but we can feel it. If a person who's negative walks into a room, you instantly know, like you can feel that vibration of them. But when we're caught in a mindset or negative thought pattern, it starts playing out in the physical body as well. Yep. And so what's your experience with that as far as the physical body goes?
I'd see thought, feeling, sensation as three cogs, that make up the human function and system of, how we operate and perceive, process. So in a way, there's a feedback loop the whole time with those three, and each one of them can give you information, if you like. So, I would probably say that beginner or introductory level is still when you're operating with those three, and ultimately to go from unhealthy sense of self to healthy sense of self is being able to not remain a mystery to yourself.
Yeah,
and that means facing so much of what comes up, and it can. Your body can be the flag that something's there. What I think I'm also talking about is when we move even past those three cogs, and I think that's the juicy stuff. To be honest.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
And so let's talk a little bit about balance. Everyone comes into my office all the time and I can't find balance. So I'd really love to know a little bit more from you about effective methods in, I guess, creating a sense of mental health balance and how mindfulness and psychology kind of come together to create that sort of balance.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So there's a few ways I can pitch this.
I love that you've been in thought with this. This is great.
Yeah. So I have this term, I guess we call it, clear mind, open heart. And in the mindfulness work, there are multiple sort of skill sets, if you like. And one of them might be, as I've mentioned here, to be able to be in the present moment awareness, neutral, non-judgmental awareness of the moment. Another one might be clarity, which is the ability to actually be able to identify what thoughts, feelings and sensations are present, but to do that in an objective way. I think where
it's all right. I love putting all of my guests under the spotlight.
Yeah.
Under the pressure.
Yeah, it's to be honest, it's
Do you think
go on.
Do you think that balance is achievable?
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
Because I think that balance is very fluid, and that there's times of really great balance where all of these areas in our life are going really, really well, and our mental capacity to kind of deal with them is going really, really well. And then something might, get thrown into one of those areas, and then all of a sudden they all become a bit of a rocky ocean. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
And what's been your experience of dealing with people and getting them through those sorts of things where they do have an obstacle kind of come in the way and it does throw things up in the air?
Well, I think probably where I'm pausing is because the work I do now, I'm created a psychology company to just look at the conventional work.
Yeah.
So in a sense, my interest is more now in who you are beyond all of this.
Yeah.
So anyone I work with now, whilst those issues might come up that you're describing, I work with them in the context of what are they getting to show you about you and who are you past that.
Yes.
And I think that's probably why I'm kind of balking at not wanting to go down too much down a conventional psychology path, because I do see that as the necessary introductory stuff, which is in some ways what I might call ED, emergency department. Is for people who generally have an issue, they're presenting with something that's very distressing, and they should be looked after properly by a skilled practitioner.
Yeah.
In that very normal, relative, get your life back on track level.
Yeah.
I'm kind of at that completely other end, in that I can literally encourage more advanced practitioners to watch their whole life in complete disarray and complete explosion
Yeah.
and go, okay, so just tell me what's moving about that.
Yeah.
And are you identified with any of it? It's like it's a much more confronting conversation because we're wanting to not have our lives explode, but to be able to be that which is beyond the exploded life.
And what does that look like for those, because I understand what you're saying and where you're going with this, but for those who might be listening and might not really quite understand.
Yeah, great. It's your job to translate as best you can, right?
Yeah. Like, what does that look like? Maybe you can give us a little insight.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not sure. Yeah, you did actually mention about those dozen properties. I had a GFC event that managed to kind of help clean out any attachment I had to building all of those things.
Yeah.
Which was kind of good. So you can have everything. I think I was featured in a real estate magazine and blah blah blah. But at that point, I was still just trying to build vehicles to be able to make a difference. So I was still practicing anything that moved or affected me. It was a chance to look.
Yeah.
And so I think, as an example, that all exploded and all disappeared. And it just was more like, what Patrick and you was left that was interested in any of that.
Yeah.
And, I was doing my best to come from like this altruistic place. So like it wasn't hugely problematic from that point of view, really. But like that's an example where you might build something that is genuinely significant, you think, for you or your life, and it could be anything from the relationship to whatever. And if something does change, you just look at what moved in you.
Yeah.
Because the immovable nature is the thing, is the place. And it doesn't mean from that place we can't live and express in the world, but it's the untouchable zone of a human, which I would call, awakening to your true nature, which is what I'm trying to bring, into that full paradigm of psychology.
Yeah.
To me, that's the most amazing conversation to have about all those things that are moving versus, I mean, if we want to go into, the conventional approach, that is, I have, some research expertise in that. There's what they call the homeostasis model of well-being, which is that if something happens, within about 8 to 12 weeks, typically we recalibrate back to our well-being because there's some kind of, it seems the theory is there's some kind of homeostatic system, a bit like temperature and everything else, that if it goes too high, we somehow find ways, social buffers and thoughts and feelings and strategies to help bring us back to where we were before.
Yeah.
It's called adaptation reflex within that. So that can get a healthy ego that gets bashed to come back to the place they were before. But the conversation we were having just before is not about that. It's about going, what did I get to see in me that, it's kind of like free therapy for me when there's something, there's a trigger. It's like, I guess, thanks. What was that moved? Because the immovable nature that we are still continually needs to be kind of cleansed and purified and whatever is unfinished.
Yeah.
And life then becomes an amazing opportunity to do that.
And how interesting are triggers?
Yeah. They're always live, right?
Yeah.
People and things.
Oh, gosh, they're so much fun. And I think that's part of that process is breathing into those triggers and exploring it and feeling what's going on and why this is happening and what it means, and evaluate a little bit more on how these things can actually benefit and change our journey and our kind of direction as we're going through this kind of human experience.
Yeah, and also to be somehow as honest and open as we can with what's actually moving, either internally, always internally, and sometimes externally to others if relevant.
Yeah.
It kind of keeps us very honest.
Yes, and it's owning our truth, right? So actually standing into the being that we actually are, going, what is this? And who is this? And what does that look like? And I had another question for you actually about what the traps might be along the way, like, places like denial, or do much shadow work. That's actually something that comes up quite a lot as well in other different spiritual circles, and bringing in psychology is the idea of shadows and ego and how that kind of plays out in people as well. Yeah,
okay. Well, one of the traps, and I guess this is not as common a trap, but it might be if you have managed to find a quiet, still space beyond everything. That's heaven. And a trigger might come. And you also know that simply by kind of closing your eyes and dissolving beyond it into heaven is just around the corner, available any moment. That's a trap, because it's actually a kind of sophisticated form of avoidance.
Yeah.
And whilst, lucky you, wonderful that you're now able to access this reference point of beyond, it kind of keeps that one covered over, really. Yeah, sidestepped. Yeah. So that's definitely one of the ones that, I look at, people I work with myself. It's that tendency, once you've gone a little further, to be able to rest. That's my first one off the ranks.
Yeah, like I myself explore my triggers a lot, because I'm someone that, I guess, I kind of like to think of it as like jumping into the juiciness of like, what's going on here,
yeah,
and why am I reacting in this way? Like, what's actually happening here?
And can I just jump in and say that to be able to do that does require a certain level of progress already, because typically when a trigger comes, it's a threat for most people. I mean, ultimately, it's a threat to the unhealthy part of us that just wants to be safe. Always a threat. But the fact that you can kind of go proactively towards it, is fantastic, because, for other people, it's like, how do I just get rid of this thing? And anesthetize it with, whatever, alcohol or self-medication or something. So, even to be able to get to that place to look is just, it's wonderful, really.
It's so freeing, though. Yeah. That's the thing. I think that, two things on there. There is, something will happen and people look for external ways to kind of band-aid that, or to avoid it, or to run away. But what they don't realise is that when they actually lean into it, and when they actually, when I'm talking about this, I imagine like a jar of honey pouring all over me. I'm kind of stepping into this ooziness of, what is this? Goo? What is this goo? Like, what is going on here? And why does this keep coming up? Like, I think when you actually step into that mess, that goo, that uncomfortable space, there's an opportunity there for healing and for change. And
if you've brought in the skill sets, which obviously, you can then be in that space and look and go, okay, so, you're not taking it so personally.
Absolutely. And that definitely requires support for some of them as well, right? So by no means do you go out and you intentionally get yourself triggered so that you have a negative situation and go, oh, well, I can't deal with this. And
it is an option. I mean, I used to send, in my earlier, more maverick days, I used to send some of my students on missions, like one of them who had it's a little bit of social phobia, not really, but he's a little bit shy, let's just say. And so, his job was to go into to the shopping centre and do his weekly shopping in his pyjamas.
Oh my gosh, that's
which
awesome.
He did, and
that's awesome.
It's always an invitation. It's never like you must.
Yeah.
But it was fun. You got stuff out of it, and like you got to see. In other words, when you're at a place where you can play a little bit, you can move, as you talked about, like lean into. You can actually lean into some of these things. But first stage always is care and safety, and making sure that people are within their range of comfortable, and because it's a false economy to push someone too hard when they can't manage what's there. So it's it's always within what's possible. But I think where I'm sometimes going is, I think people that want more aren't being told that there is more, that they can go for more. Like, I want to push the threshold or the ceiling up a little bit. Hence in the mental health conversations, they're often just about coping and resilience, which is critical, 101, necessary. But then if people are doing a little better now, it's like, well, how can you kind of like go a little further? Because in the gym we do that, or in sports we do that. So it's like, same here.
Yes, yeah, and I love that too. They're highlighting the fact that I think there's a surface level of things that are generally just kind of given to people who are going through situations and they need that support and self-care. But once you get past that stage, I mean, there's so much more, but there's just not enough information out there to go, what does that look like, and how can I actually get more information? And on that note, like, how can people kind of access all of the things that you're offering?
Yeah, well, I think the website probably, drpatrickjones.com, is the place to go to look for things. We're putting together products and books and things, at the moment. So I think that's probably the first place for people to look. And of course, these days, social media, whatever that one is, Dr. Patrick Jones Official. I think we've got videos and interviews there as well.
Yes, I've seen, on Facebook and you're on Instagram as well, so people can check you out there.
That's right.
Apparently.
I think they all link.
They all link together. It's okay. My Facebook got hacked the other day, so that's very annoying, but that's what happens.
Wow.
So now I have to change my whole page over. So social media
Some
is...
bored person wanting to incur more negative karma. Good job.
Do they not understand the negative karma they're going to get from this? So in the next life, who knows what's going to happen? But was there anything that you'd love to add before we wrap up our chat today?
I think probably just love the fact that we can have a conversation about the beyond as well.
Yeah.
I think that's rare and important. And I was doing some branding with someone, and they caught on quite quickly to what I was about, which was creating a world of where people are psychologically healthy and spiritually awakened. And it's that combination, I think, that's critical. But it's not just the psychologically healthy, and I think that's mainly the conversation in the general arenas. But I think the spiritually awakened is, and I'm truly trying to mainstream it, I guess, in terms of it being Sahaja Samadhi in the Indian Hindu traditions is like the natural resting state. It's actually in the natural state of a human being is to have that equanimity and that stillness. In fact, Sogyal Rinpoche described it as, essential nature is empty, but its radiance is compassion. Like it's peaceful, but then it connects out in a loving, kind of naturally, spontaneously good way.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I'm wanting to do. And for some reason, for karma, from my own purification, I've gone into the academic space to keep trying to critique the paradigm. And I was talking earlier about I'm just in another lengthy peer review process for another article. But it's because I think we, hooking to what we were saying earlier, I think we deserve more. I think we deserve to be told more. And I think when I first experienced the gap between thought and it's sustained for 30 seconds and then ultimately 30 minutes, it's like, what?
Yeah.
I've been in the arenas that should know about this stuff forever, and it's like I suddenly get that there's this opportunity to be and experience more, and then to have those senses of self just be shown and seen and to be constructed. Never a conversation had been had in my training or even in meditation training that I went to. It was like it was about being peaceful and still and really important things. I always want to affirm the goodness of these processes.
Yeah.
I never want to deride the value. It's just it's more the value add, you could say. I think that's what this conversation is also about.
Yay. Well, thank you so much for coming in, having a chat with me. And I have a feeling that we'll be catching up again to go a little bit deeper with
we have some other topics.
That we really want to get into. And this is kind of like a nice, juicy kind of introduction so that my listeners can kind of get to know you a little bit more and what you're about. But I do feel a bit more of a juicy topic coming up in later chats.
Certainly one we could play with,
So thank you again for joining me, and until next time, hopefully I'll see you again.
Thanks for helping let me be on the show. It's
nice. You're very welcome. And all my listeners, thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time. See you later.
The information, views and opinions expressed on this podcast should not be used or treated as a substitute for nutritional, medical, psychological or other advice by a qualified medical health professional. Hosts and guests on the podcast express their own opinions, experiences and conclusions. And nothing on the podcast should be used to diagnose, treat, cure or prevent any medical conditions. The podcast is not intended to replace any medical or mental health treatment. All information and advice provided is for general well-being and does not take individual cases into consideration. Neither Tracy Saltis, guests on the podcast, or any sponsors endorse the opinions, views, or conclusions expressed or shared on the podcast. Tracy Saltis takes no responsibility for any symptoms or consequences as a direct or indirect result of this podcast.